Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some malicious compliance stories. Today we've got 3 tales of people who refused to let entitlement slide and found creative ways to push back. One involves a Tesla owner who learned that karma flows better than electricity, another a boss who discovered that rigid rules don't fix flexible work, and the last a woman who finally drew a line at her own pool. Here we go. A Tesla owner took the last EV charger spot without plugging in, then went to yoga. My city rolled out public charging stations for electric vehicles a few years ago, and for people like me, they're not a convenience, they're a necessity. I live in an apartment building where installing a personal charger isn't an option, so I rely entirely on these public charge ports to keep my hybrid running. When the program first started, the parking spots were marked with signs that said electric vehicles only. It seemed straightforward. If you drove an EV, you could park there. The obvious assumption was that you were there to charge. The issue, of course, is that people will exploit any loophole they can find. If a gas-powered car blocked one of those spots, it could be reported and towed, since the cord wouldn't even reach them. But electric car owners, whole different story. Some of them treated those spots like premium reserved parking, pulling in and walking away without even plugging in. They didn't need the free electricity, but they sure liked the prime location. And yes, 9 times out of 10, it was a Tesla. It became a pattern. I'd check my app to see an available charger, drive over, and find a sleek black or white Tesla sitting there smugly unplugged. No cable connected, no charging session active, just someone who thought owning an electric vehicle entitled them to a closer spot. I wouldn't call the police because technically they were following the posted rule. Their vehicle was electric. It didn't matter that the charger itself was useless to everyone else while they were inside grabbing coffee or doing Pilates. One morning, I pulled up to a set of chargers that my app showed as having one open port. I was stopped at a nearby red light, and from that vantage point, I could see the charging area clearly. A black Tesla had just taken the last spot. The driver stepped out, adjusted his sunglasses, and walked briskly into a yoga studio on the corner. I watched carefully. He didn't even glance at the charging cord. He just locked his car and disappeared inside. I parked nearby and waited. I figured maybe he'd forgotten and would come back to plug in. He didn't. 20 minutes passed. That was enough time for the yoga session to be well underway. People settling into their breathing exercises and downward dogs. I sat in my car, mildly annoyed, but mostly feeling petty and inspired. So I did the only thing available to me. I looked up the phone number for the yoga studio and called. A cheerful woman answered with a soft, "Namaste Yoga, how can I help you?" I kept my voice neutral and said, "Hi, I just wanted to let you know that someone in your class drives a black Tesla, license plate blank, 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 blank." I read the plate number slowly and clearly. "There's a tow truck about to hitch up the car for blocking a charging spot. You might want to let them know immediately." There was a brief gasp on the other end of the line. "Oh my gosh, thank you so much for calling," she said, sounding genuinely grateful. "I'll let them know right away." I hung up and waited. Less than 2 minutes later, the studio door flew open. Out stormed Mr. Zen himself, moving faster than I'd seen anyone move in yoga pants. He practically sprinted around the corner toward his car, scanning the street for an imaginary tow truck. I stayed parked far enough away that he wouldn't notice me watching. He reached his Tesla, looked around frantically, and realized nothing was happening. The car was perfectly fine. No tow truck, no ticket. Just him, slightly sweaty and very confused, standing beside a vehicle he'd assumed was untouchable. I imagined the interruption inside the studio. "Excuse me, does anyone here drive a black Tesla?" Silence, then him sheepishly raising his hand. I pictured a room full of yogis silently judging him for being the guy who had his license plate announced mid-session. That's the part that makes the whole thing work. No actual tow truck, no ticket, just the threat of one, delivered mid-downward dog. He spent the rest of his yoga session wondering if his car was still there. His zen was shattered by the possibility of consequences. He lingered outside for a few minutes, probably debating whether to move the car. He didn't. He went back inside, and I finally drove off to find another charger elsewhere. But the damage was done. His peaceful flow had been disrupted. His carefully curated aura of calm had been pierced by the possibility of consequences. For weeks afterward, I smiled every time I thought about it. There's something deeply satisfying about harmlessly inconveniencing someone who inconveniences everyone else. I hadn't damaged his car or gotten him fined. I'd simply introduced the possibility that he might face consequences, and that alone was enough to rattle him. Eventually, the city caught on. Enough complaints piled up about EV owners hogging spots without charging that the signage changed. The new signs read, "Electric vehicles only while charging." That small addition made all the difference. Now if someone parks there without plugging in, they can actually be ticketed. It's not quite as creative as disrupting a yoga session, but it's efficient. When I see a Tesla parked in a charging spot without a cord attached, I don't need to get imaginative anymore. I call it in, and enforcement handles the rest. The tickets add up, and word spreads quickly. I still think about that morning sometimes. Somewhere out there is a man who probably tells his friends about the day a mysterious tow truck almost ruined his practice. He probably fumes about the audacity of whoever called. Meanwhile, I'm just grateful I can finally charge my car without competing against someone's sense of entitlement. And if the occasional Tesla owner has to learn the hard way that a charger isn't a VIP parking pass, I'm more than happy to help reinforce the lesson. And our second story. When your boss doesn't understand that work doesn't fit neatly into 9-to-5 boxes, sometimes you have to show him, with data and a backlog. About 15 years ago, I landed a job at a government agency managing a large fleet of vehicles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and I took pride in it. My responsibilities covered everything from driving cars to repair shops and inspection centers to handling minor fixes myself. I replaced certain light bulbs, topped off fluids, refilled windshield washer reservoirs, and made sure each vehicle had the proper emergency equipment. On top of that, I hand-washed every single car, inside and out, because we didn't send them through automated washes. Cleaning and preparing one vehicle properly took time. A thorough wash, interior cleaning, fluid checks, and equipment verification required at least 45 minutes if everything went smoothly, and sometimes closer to an hour. I didn't cut corners because these cars were used by public servants who relied on them being safe and functional. The job came with flexible hours, which meant as long as I completed my workload and hit my overall weekly hours, no one micromanaged when I arrived or left. That flexibility allowed me to work efficiently around the unpredictable nature of car maintenance. Some days I'd finish a car at 3:50 p.m. and need an extra 10 minutes to complete it properly. Other days I might finish a vehicle at 3:30 p.m. and not have enough time to start another one before the end of the day, so I'd wrap up early. It balanced out over the week. I wasn't gaming the system. I was simply using common sense to manage tasks that didn't fit neatly into hour-long blocks. Everything ran smoothly, and the fleet stayed in great condition. About a month into my job, my boss called me into his office. He had that tight-lipped expression managers get when they've convinced themselves there's a problem to fix. He told me he felt I was taking advantage of the flexible hours. He said from now on I had to stop working precisely at 4 p.m. every day, no exceptions. His tone suggested he thought he was tightening up some kind of discipline issue. I didn't argue, I simply nodded and said, "Understood, I'll make sure I clock out exactly at 4. If he wanted strict compliance, I was happy to provide it. The following week, I adjusted my workflow accordingly. If it was after 3:15 p.m. and I hadn't already started a car, I wouldn't begin one. There wasn't enough time to wash it, inspect it, refill fluids, and ensure everything was documented before 4 p.m. sharp. Instead, I filled that last 45 minutes with minor tasks. I swept the garage floor. I reorganized cleaning supplies. I restocked the supply cabinet. I wiped down tools that didn't really need wiping. I made sure I was standing by the clock at 3:59 p.m. so I could punch out right on time. No overtime, no extra 5 minutes to finish a bumper, no staying late to vacuum crumbs out of the back seat. He wanted you to stop taking advantage, so you did. You followed his rule exactly. And suddenly the car stopped getting finished. Funny how that works. You weren't slacking before, you were just doing what the job required. Now he gets to see the difference. Within a few weeks, the difference was noticeable. Fewer cars were being completed each day. Vehicles that would previously have been finished by the end of a shift were now waiting until the following morning. The total number of cleaned and inspected cars dropped. It wasn't dramatic, but it was measurable. My boss started getting questions from other departments about turnaround times. Eventually, he called me back into his office. He looked at a report on his desk and said, "I've noticed productivity's gone down. Why are fewer vehicles being processed?" I kept my voice neutral and replied, "Since I have to leave exactly at 4 p.m., I can't start a car after 3:15 or 3:20. It wouldn't be possible to finish it before the deadline." He frowned slightly and said, "But before you were handling more cars." "Yes," I answered, "because before, if I needed 10 extra minutes to finish properly, I'd stay and do it. And if I finished one early, I'd leave a little earlier. It balanced out." There was a long pause while he connected the dots. I could see the realization settling in that the so-called problem he'd fixed hadn't existed in the first place. The flexibility hadn't been me exploiting the system, it had been me making it work efficiently. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. "So you weren't taking advantage," he muttered, almost to himself. "You were just managing your time." I nodded and said, "Exactly. The work doesn't fit perfectly into fixed time blocks. Sometimes it needs a few extra minutes." After a moment, he sighed and said, "All right, let's go back to how you were doing it before." To his credit, he apologized. He admitted he'd jumped to conclusions and created a rule that didn't account for the nature of the work. He told me to return to using the flexible hours as I saw fit, as long as the job was done properly. I went back to finishing cars when they were nearly done, even if that meant staying 10 minutes late once in a while. And if I wrapped something up early, I'd head out without guilt. Productivity went back up almost immediately. Turnaround times improved and the fleet stayed in solid shape. More importantly, there was no more tension about the clock. The boss stopped watching the minute hand like it was a disciplinary tool and started focusing on results instead. I stayed at that job for another 2 years after that incident. We actually got along well from that point forward. He never micromanaged my time again, and I never gave him a reason to question my work ethic. Sometimes managers learn the hard way that rigid policies don't always produce better outcomes. In this case, all it took was following the rule exactly as written for a few weeks to show that common sense had been doing the heavy lifting all along. And our last story. I told her to find another pool. A year ago, my life split clean down the middle. Within a matter of months, I lost my sister, my brother-in-law, and my dad. One day, I was just an aunt with a busy job and weekend visits. The next, I was a full-time guardian to my 2 nieces, Lily, who was 5 at the time, and Sophie, who was 3. My dad left me his house, so we moved in there for stability. It felt strange living in the same rooms where I'd grown up, now trying to create something steady for 2 grieving little girls. Somehow, they adapted faster than I did. We moved to a small village where everyone knows everyone's business before you even processed it yourself. That's where Karen came in. She was about 45, one of those hyper-involved community moms who seemed to run the school calendar unofficially. At first, she was helpful. She made sure the girls were invited to parties and added us to every group chat imaginable. But she had this habit of saying things like, "You're so lucky to have such a gorgeous house," with a bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. The first time she said it, I answered honestly. I'd trade it in a heartbeat if it meant having my family back. She laughed and told me I was being sentimental. Karen especially loved hosting events at my pool, only she somehow made it sound like it was her pool. She'd text people saying, "Come to our pool party." Then she'd show up early, directing traffic and rearranging furniture. I'd find myself hovering awkwardly in my own kitchen while she introduced guests as if she owned the place. Our youngest daughters share a birthday, so we'd usually combine celebrations, which meant Karen took even more control. I tolerated it because Lily and Sophie were happy, and I was too tired to fight over social territory. That's the thing, you were still holding yourself together after losing your family, and she was busy claiming your pool like it was her country club. The "you're so lucky" comment with that dead-eyed smile says everything. She never saw your grief, she just saw real estate. 6 months ago, my boyfriend Ryan moved in. I've known Ryan for years, long before my sister passed. He'd always been Uncle Ryan to the girls, the guy who fixed scraped knees and built pillow forts in the living room. When we finally admitted our feelings and started dating, it felt natural. The girls adore him, especially Emma, my oldest niece, who's now 16. Emma lost her dad at a vulnerable age, and I could see how much it meant to her to have a steady male presence again. Then one evening, Karen texted me out of the blue. "I'm hearing some concerning things about Ryan and Emma," she wrote. My heart dropped into my stomach. She claimed he'd behaved inappropriately and that people were talking. I didn't confront Ryan immediately. I went upstairs and asked Emma about her day. When she realized there were rumors, she burst into tears. She told me that while walking down the high street, Ryan had given her a side hug and kissed the top of her head. It made me feel like I had a dad again, she sobbed, and now they've made it gross. I saw red in a way I didn't know I was capable of. I texted Karen back and told her to stop spreading gossip immediately. She doubled down. She said I was too young and blinded by love to see that Ryan was manipulating me. She actually suggested he was grooming Emma. I told her again, clearly and calmly, to drop it. She didn't. So I blocked her number and removed her from my social media. Within days, other parents started sending me screenshots of vague but obvious posts Karen had made about protecting children from predators and mothers who refused to see the truth. She never used names, but she didn't need to. Ryan was crushed. Emma was humiliated. I sat down with Emma again and made it clear that she could tell me anything, ever, without fear. There was nothing there except a grieving teenager who'd felt safe and loved. That should have been the end of it, but in a small village, gossip has a longer shelf life than milk. A few days ago, I ran into Karen outside the bakery. She smiled brightly like nothing had happened and said, "So which date works best for the girls' joint pool party? Everyone's looking forward to it." I stared at her for a moment, genuinely stunned by the audacity. I told her there would be no pool party this year. Then I added, "And even if there were, I can't imagine you'd want your daughter at the home of a so-called threat to children and his enabler." Her face twitched. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly. "I can show you screenshots if that would help," I replied. She immediately pivoted, saying her daughter was so excited and that I was being selfish. I told her she should have thought about that before implying my partner was a predator. I made it clear that if our daughters wanted to see each other, that was their choice, but Karen herself was no longer welcome on my property. Later that evening, she posted on the village Facebook page about selfish incomers who don't understand community spirit. The post was eventually removed, but not before her friends chimed in with passive-aggressive comments. One woman even texted me saying I should be kinder considering the circumstances. I still don't know what circumstances she meant. That I buried half my family last year? That I should be grateful for crumbs of social acceptance? Half the village probably thinks I'm dramatic. I don't care. I've rebuilt a life from absolute wreckage. I've held 2 grieving kids together with nothing but stubborn love and late-night reassurance. If protecting my daughters and the man who's treated them with nothing but respect makes me the villain in Karen's narrative, then I'll happily play the part. She can find another pool to host her parties at. 3 different ways to draw a line. Story 1 was the threat of consequences. The Tesla owner thought he'd found a loophole: park in the EV spot, don't plug in, enjoy prime real estate. He didn't count on someone being petty enough to disrupt his yoga flow with a well-timed phone call. No damage, no ticket, just the sheer panic of imagining his car on a tow truck. Sometimes the threat's enough. Story 2 was the patience of proof. The boss saw flexible hours and assumed exploitation. Instead of arguing, the employee followed the new rule exactly and productivity dropped. The data spoke for itself. The boss apologized. Not every victory needs a confrontation. Sometimes you just let reality do the talking. But story 3 wins, not because of the pool, though banning someone from your property after they slander your partner is deeply satisfying, but because of the backstory. The OP lost her sister, her brother-in-law, and her dad within months. She became a full-time guardian to 2 grieving kids. She rebuilt a life from rubble, and through all of it, Karen treated her like a backdrop, a venue, a source of free parties. The "you're so lucky" comment wasn't ignorance, it was erasure. And when Karen finally crossed into cruelty, the OP didn't argue. She just closed the gate. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.